you embrace this psychological change where you fortified the art of like mushin, no mind, right? So this is like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu centricity. Would you overthink why you would roll? That's why it took you to get into that philosophy?
Absolutely. You've identified a very important point, and I think I grew up with a lot of fear. I grew up with being an extremely emotional kid. I was very sensitive. And when I would compete, I would always go back in my head and go, well, what allowed me to compete well and what allowed me to compete poorly? What happened there? And it was hard for me to pinpoint for a little while because I would always go to the physical. I would always go to the technical. I'd be like, well, should have done this, should have done that. Now, there were certainly things that I could have done much better on a physical, in the physical nature of things, and the technical nature of things. However, I felt that when I was most at home is when I was not emotional, when I was allowing my body to just do what it did. And when I allowed my training to take over and I was able to take away the mind. And that's what I had to work on. But then you can't just go, okay, well, I'm gonna take away my mind. It's almost like, all right, now I'm going to meditate. The body doesn't work that way, right? You have to allow for it to happen and you need to practice that mind state. So I felt that by being less emotional, it allowed me to be a better competitor. But I needed to retain my sensitivity as an individual to feel what was going on, of what my opponent was trying to do, of how was his mind state, of where the weight is distributed. Where am I supposed to go?
Because there's like a physical momentum. And then you're emptying mentally here, but there's a physical momentum that you had to still be attached to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
When I was competing a lot, I wanted to understand the mind states of people that did things that were even more difficult than, say, cage fighting. I was fascinated by the samurai culture.
Okay.
I was fascinated by special operations soldiers, and I read a lot about it because you're talking about something that means life or death. And while that was a possibility when I was fighting or maybe competing in jiu-jitsu, rare, but it's a possibility. I knew that if I could go to those individuals that were true professionals that either had to kill or be killed, I could understand something about myself that would help bring out a much better competitor and a much better martial artist. And I also approach it in a different way. If you're approaching martial arts and you're saying, well, if I lose this, I could lose this tournament, or I don't get this medal, or I don't get a pat on the back from my friends, that's a very different mind state than, say, I'm going into this competition either with the idea that there's either life or death here, that I must kill or be killed, that if I make a mistake in my training, that could lead to my death. It's a very different way of approaching martial arts. And I think this is where we're now going back to what martial arts was all about. You trained
martial
fighting.
culture.
Martial culture. You trained in martial arts because maybe your farm would be invaded by a rival family or some other community next door that wants to take your stuff. Well, you better be ready for that. And again, that means your life is on the line. Your family's life is on the line. Your martial arts better be pretty damn good.
So at this point, there is a strong amount of psychological strength and psychosis that's been brought to you by being actually in MMA. So I'm going to make a statement. I want you to react to it. As important as financial literacy as like NBA players are getting, I feel like fighters, both in jiu-jitsu and MMA, need a sports psychologist. How do you feel about that statement?
I think that's a very important statement. I think that a lot of times we take what our environment gives us, and it's not always the right advice. I have never really liked the go hard bro mentality. I've never liked a coach that has been yelling at me to do a certain thing. It gets me out of my mind state. I think that for me, that is my approach. That's what works best for me. I understand that there's different approaches to that.
Sure.
But again, the only way to elevate what you're doing is to look inward. And sometimes we don't look inward in the right way, and we need someone to help us do that. And I think psychologists are able to do that very well, as long as you get a good therapist or a good psychologist. And I think that we're starting to move away from that culture as well. You know, I think my parents' culture, they were embarrassed to go and see a psychologist. It said that basically you had some kind of mental weakness, when the reality is you're trying to identify the weakness and then strengthen that within yourself. And I think that it's important for not only just athletes, but everyday human beings to get the reflection of others and a psychologist to really tell you what's going on inside. Who are you really outside of your own perspective? Because sometimes we just don't see it. As much as we think we do, we don't. And there's a whole process in how we do that.
Did you ever seek like emotional help? Because it's easy because you're a Gen Xer, you're a fighter, be like, K-Flo, are you pussy, dude? What's up with you, man? Well, what's this? You need to lay down in the sofa?
I hated losing more than anything else.
Okay.
I hated not performing more than anything else. So that's when humility started coming way more into the picture.
Okay.
Of, wait, so you're saying you don't want to improve as a competitor because you're embarrassed or because people think you're a macho? I had already given away all of my pride when I decided to be a martial artist. Everyone thought I was a loser, that I wanted to take an easy way out, that I was pursuing something that was impossible. Might as well stick with it and go all the way. And I think that as silly as that sounds, and it's not, but I wanted to improve myself no matter what. How can I do it? I was willing to do it as long as it was legal and it didn't compromise my morals. And to me, I think that's what martial arts is all about. I always dreamed of being like David Carradine in Kung Fu, where he would travel the world and learn his martial arts and do his martial arts and test his martial arts. And I was actually living that life. I actually was able to create that life and be able to train with the best martial artists, the best instructors, and learn and improve. And if I was serious about this, I needed to do whatever it took to improve. And that meant talking to a sports psychologist or whoever it was that was going to give me that information to better myself.
I know you have it. How would you transition from that triangle to the armbar?
Gotcha. So if I'm here like this, I'm gonna wait for you to either elevate your position or give me an angle where I should go for it. So when you start elevating, lifting up, maybe this might be a good time. I don't love this angle right here. If you went a little bit over here, maybe I would switch right to an arm lock this way. So more if you're trying to go this way, I would probably switch to an arm lock. But if you're elevating over here, I would probably just push, I would probably just push your hip away, get your hips away from your head, and then re-secure my triangle choke. Do you know how to do the triangle, Charles?
Terribly.
Okay, let's do it. So let's say you're here. This is one of the more powerful chokes we can do because we're utilizing the strong muscles of our legs to choke around the neck. So one arm is on the inside and one arm is on the outside. So your legs are making an impact on the carotid artery of my neck, right? Lock your triangle. The problem with this move, even if I'm not extending my arm, is I can kind of stack you, right? This happens like very commonly as far as a counter. Grab your shin and put your foot in my hip. Right. Now, as I go to stack, push my hip away from you and hang heavy on your shin. So you're pushing my hip away from you. Now, once I start to get a little heavy and I'm losing momentum and my weight is not on you and on the mat, you lock your triangle, squeeze your knees together, and you submit me.
And I think I had you really high and stackable.
Correct.
Or with the foot on the hip, that enabled me to kind of push you back so that way you're really low on me.
Exactly. In jiu-jitsu, what we're constantly trying to do is strengthen our position and weaken the position of our opponents. If we can do that at the same time, and if we can do that repeatedly, now we're doing good jiu-jitsu. So we're always looking for those advantages. How do I weaken your position, weaken your structure, and strengthen mine?